Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and there's a lot happening in the gold world, and I want to get into this article here. I think it's important to talk about the most recent news in gold because there's no shortage of excitement around the gold market as we see, the negative yields, as we see this push towards a recession, possibly negative interest rates in the very near future. Things that we all predicted for a very long time and are all coming true today, but of course we're still called crazy and stupid and whatever. But, I don't even want the vindication because it's sad. It's horrible to watch this massive complex of money printing, money, quote unquote, and destruction of currency and the price of living inflating vastly, watching the poverty skyrocket, watching the homelessness skyrocket. It's sad. The system does have to come to an end eventually, though, and we're seeing, the changing of the guard right now. Anyway, as this article says, gold prices will keep rising because crash conditions are becoming obvious. And as the article goes into, the price movements of precious metals are difficult for some people to understand. In the world of equities, investors are mesmerized by tickers day in and day out, and market movements occur minute by minute. This realm of investment teaches people to shorten their memories, their attention spans, and their patience. In the world of gold and silver, however, investors buy and sell according to cycles that last years, oftentimes decades. It is the complete antithesis to stocks. And as it continues here, this is why gold catches a lot of ignorant criticisms at times. The barbaric relic does not behave the way day traders want it to behave. It sleeps. They ignore it or laugh at it, and then it explodes. It is not surprising that your average stock market player is usually caught completely off guard when an economic crisis hits Main Street, and while the average gold investor already saw the event coming many months in advance. The gold mentality lends itself to caution, observation, and historical relevance. The stock market mentality lends itself to carelessness and the denial of history. I would acknowledge here that there is plenty of evidence of paper market manipulation of gold and silver to the downside by major banks like JP Morgan. Any investors in metals should take this into account. However, it is also important to realize that in moments of economic uncertainty, the physical market can and does overtake paper manipulation, and prices rise anyway. This is exactly what happened in the lead up to the 2008 crash, and it's happening again today. Gold and silver have had an exciting run in the past couple of months, and this is taking place exactly because precious metals are doing what they are supposed to do: act as a hedge against economic instability. This is where I see a disconnect in the mainstream media and the stock market pundits in their explanations for the gold rally since July. The economic media and some in the alternative media expected gold to take a dive in July. Why? Because they also had high expectations for Fed Chair Jerome Powell to massage the markets with an ample interest rate cut and promises of stimulus measures in the near future. This did not happen. Instead, market investors were shocked to hear Powell deny any need for renewed quantitative easing, and they were greeted with a marginal 0.25% cut in rates with no guarantees that any more cuts were on the way. In August, this message was reiterated at the annual Fed Jackson Hole meeting, and multiple Fed officials indicated that the central bank has no intention of introducing new stimulus and that aggressive rate cuts are unlikely. Currently, the Fed continues to hold rates near their neutral rate of inflation. They are still cutting assets from their balance sheet despite claims that they would be stopping early. And the Fed funds rate is currently the single highest rate of all central banks in the developed world. Global dollar liquidity is drying up, and mainstream analysts are practically begging the central bank to reintroduce stimulus measures. The Fed also continues to make the false claim that U.S. economic growth is strong and that a recovery is still underway, despite the fact that The yield curve has flattened to levels not seen in over a decade. Housing sales are falling. Auto sales are falling. Retailers are expecting store closures of over 12,000 outlets this year. U.S. freight is grinding to a halt. U.S. manufacturing PMI is the weakest it has been since 2009, etc. Some of the Fed's own data is showing a recessionary storm is about to make landfall despite all their statistical rigging, and yet they ignore it completely and repeat the mantra that all is well. This should not surprise anyone. This is what the Fed always does. They create massive debt bubbles. They then tighten policy conditions, causing the bubble to implode. They then lie about the economic threat until the crash is about to cripple the average citizen. Then they claim no one could have seen this coming. As I have been predicting for the past few years, as this article continues, the Fed is keeping liquidity tight right up until crash conditions become obvious to the public. Talk of recession is now being taken a bit more seriously in the mainstream. And the only thing left to prop up economic optimism is the U.S. consumer and his debt burden, which is growing far beyond the historic highs seen during the crash of 2008. Stock markets are being propped up by corporate stock buybacks, but for how long? How long can these companies pour capital into their own stocks to fight a losing battle while the Fed reduces the cash flow? In the wake of the Fed's disappointment and the refusal to promise investors that the old fiat punch bowl will return, the U.S. dollar index spiked in July in response, and overall has continued to climb. The vast majority of analysts claim that gold prices would plummet. Instead, they accelerated. As I predicted in my article, gold will rise even if the Fed doesn't cut interest rates. The gold price found wings in July and August. This matches exactly with what happened in 2006 to 2007. As the Fed raised interest rates and tightened liquidity, the dollar index jumped, but gold prices still almost doubled in the same time frame. This is because the dollar index does not always dictate the price of gold. Sometimes gold decouples from the dollar and it rises according to market instability when a crisis is near. Precious metals are heavily bought. The dollar becomes a secondary issue. I believe that this trend will continue. Currently, the trade war has entered a new phase with the latest round of tariffs on both the U.S. and Chinese sides. I said it over a year and a half ago, and I'll say it again. The trade war is not going to end until the crash runs its course. It is a highly useful distraction away from the central bankers and their controlled demolition of the everything bubble. And I'm going to break away from this article for a moment, but I do see this was originally published by Brandon Smith at Birch Gold Group. So I want to make that clear. We can look at the gold price here. Now it's down a bit today as I report this, actually quite significantly, 0.4%. But of course, this is a fluctuation of a market that, by the way, he mentions is manipulated. It's very, very manipulated. I think a lot of people don't do it justice when they talk about how incredibly manipulated this market actually is overall. I find it interesting because, we see all these banks that have been manipulating the market for so long starting to shutter, and some to a great extent. Now, remember, these are bankrupt banks, and they never recovered from the 2008 recession. Everything's just been papered over with debt. The recession never truly ended. But with that said, their cash to deposit ratio is so incredibly small that we see the evidence of them being completely bankrupt, in some cases under 1%. In many cases, actually, for most credit unions, under 1%. In many of the big banks, cash deposit ratio, so deposits actually covered in cash. So they don't have cash. They don't have money. And on top of that, you have the Fed propping up everything. There's $0 trading desk propping up markets on Wall Street, along with the share buybacks. It is ridiculous. And they mentioned the auto sales are down. The housing bubble is starting to shutter to a great extent. We're seeing that to a great extent in places like Seattle, in places like Toronto, in places like San Diego, etc., San Francisco. And what do you expect to happen? I mean, you have these collateralized debt obligations, mortgage-backed securities, subprime lending. We have the credit default swaps. You see the same with the auto-backed securities and the packaging together debt and nonsense all together in these packages. Say you have 99 terrible mortgages and one good mortgage, and let's rate a AAA by the top mortgage and just bundle it all together. It's crazy, and we've seen this a million times, and they changed the name from collateralized debt obligations to collateralized loan obligations. It's the same thing. It's the same freaking thing. And they think, well, maybe they won't notice this time. And, you know, the sad thing is most people don't. Most people have absolutely no idea how this is affecting them. Deutsche Bank is going down. All these big banks are going down that are entrenched in completely manipulating the gold and silver prices for years. I think it's been in an artificial bear market for a long time. I don't think this bear market, the bear market it was in, was real. Now, with that said, we're talking about bear and bull, boom and bust here. I should note that I don't actually look at gold and silver as much of an investment. I see that as wealth insurance, in my opinion. It's not one of those markets that's as good to play with. I mean, it's better to get involved in mining companies at that point, because gold and silver is meant as wealth insurance, protecting your purchasing power against the inevitable crashes, because all fiat currencies eventually revert to zero. So when I see it talked about as an investment, sure, it can technically be used as an investment, and you can play the market, no doubt about it. I don't think it's as lucrative, you know, for day trading, obviously, for obvious reasons. You could see that just by looking at the market itself. If I'll bring it up here again, I mean, this isn't a lucrative way to do day trading, in my opinion. There's much better ways. Crypto is much more enjoyable to do this with, and sad when it goes down, but you know, that's the way of the market. But I mean, look how much it has gone up in the last year. Now let's bring this out 30 years. Let's bring this out 30 years here. So of course we see the 2011-2012 phenomenon take place there, but we also saw a vast amount of paper manipulation after that, and I think the banks purposely drove the price down. The dollar was looking at, you know, a complete collapse around that time frame. There was a lot of fear that this was the end of the US dollar. People misinterpret, or I guess they underestimate how powerfully stupid long-term but powerfully useful short-term the Fed can be. The Fed is a master manipulator and can prop up a terrible system, even in its worst days. But we're getting to a point where it just cannot happen anymore. We see the yield curve inversion. You can only paper over debt so much. I mean, there is a certain line that has to be drawn. I don't know where exactly, because it surprised me over the years that it's lasted as long as it has been, which is why I never put a date on the crash, by the way. It's impossible to truly say. But we are seeing all these telltale signs, and they get worse by the day, and we see the everything bubble worldwide and a derivatives bubble around $45 trillion just for Deutsche Bank alone. Now, go worldwide, it's a multi-quadrillion dollar derivatives bubble. How does that work? And auto bubble and pensions, pension shortfalls worldwide set to hit 400 trillion by the year 2050. I don't think it'll last that long, but that's almost 5 times the global GDP. So the notion that, oh, everything's going to be fine, don't worry, everything's all well and good and nothing bad's going to happen, it's so delusional. Sure, we have seen it pushed off longer than expected, but that isn't to say that basic economics will not take its toll on this huge monetary crisis that we're facing, which is, I'm optimistic. I think a lot of people are heading in the right direction. I think we see a lot of people moving towards gold and silver. Private ownership is up dramatically, as we interviewed David Morgan earlier this year on from the Morgan Report. Gold ownership, private ownership is up hugely. Now, of course, banks and governments are going to buy up gold. They're going to buy up Bitcoin. They're going to buy up these things because they'd be stupid not to, because their system, their paper system, is in a tailspin. But with that said, I mean, do as they do, not as they say, right? I mean, don't manipulate markets and push people into vast homelessness and destroy millions of lives and cause all these problems perpetually for eternity, pushing people into more dependence. But if you see them buy a bunch of gold, maybe it's a good time to buy gold. Maybe they know something that you don't, or maybe you do know. I don't know. Maybe that I can't exactly say. But we are on the cusp of a massive movement, and I think it's more of an evolution than a revolution between digital and physical use cases, and people flooding into these assets because everyone knows there's something wrong. This is one of the reasons I think independent medias have been so insanely muzzled lately, and our viewership has been driven down 80% by algorithm on YouTube since January. I think this is one of the reasons, because independent medias and other medias around the world are spreading this information. People are going, oh man, the dollar is worth nothing. It's enforced by usury, legal tender laws, by fraud. We have to pay off the interest on the debt. That's where a ton of our taxes go to. They do deficit spending like the ancient Romans did in order to pay off massive war spending. It creates this perpetual paradigm where if they shove you down a bottomless pit of debt, you're forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system, pushing you into perfect servitude to them, right where they want you. People are looking at that and going, maybe I should protect my family. Maybe it isn't that difficult to try and understand basic economics. It's really basic. It's not a difficult subject. It's just that it's made to sound complicated on purpose to shoo people away from understanding it. Because if you understand money, you control your money, and therefore the money printers aren't controlling you. Isn't that an amazing thing? Doesn't it feel amazing to be responsible, to be financially stable, to be able to control your life, to be able to control your finances, and hopefully the future of your children? Isn't that important? Meanwhile, we see homelessness rise at a dramatic scale. Everywhere you look is just vast homelessness. It's disgusting. I was recently in Greece, and we know how their economic system has been doing over the last 15, 20 years. It's just been in a tailspin, horrible. And it's turned into a third world country in cities like Athens. The rest of the country looks beautiful. People are still poor as hell, though. And I mean, you walk down the street in Athens and you wouldn't recognize it as a first world country. It's sad, it's disgusting, and you look everywhere and there's just homeless people laying everywhere. There's protests and people are feeling tensions, the rise of these tensions, and there's Molotov cocktails going off. There's fights with the cops. There's buildings being burned down. There's protests. There's stuff happening in Hong Kong. There's stuff happening in Paris. There's stuff happening in Spain. There's stuff happening in Italy and Greece, where I just was. All these places, it's insane. And then you come to the United States and you look in LA and New York and Detroit and Baltimore and Boston and all these places, and it's just insane how much poverty is taking place, and at the same time, the media is trying to divide us against each other, so we're distracted from the real enemy, and we attack each other and fight each other, and, enjoy the bread and circuses that they hand us, like the ancient Romans did, as I, again, detailed in my report recently on ancient Rome, which you could find on our homepage, and in our recent videos. There's so many similarities between ancient Rome and the U.S. today. But again, you see all these problems. You see in London homelessness rising, crazy amounts of homelessness, and you see all this discord, and you see all these people fighting, and you see all these people attacking each other, and you see tension and stress. And the government in a lot of ways is like, great, we got people in further dependency. They're scared, they're in fear, maybe they'll fall to their knees. But I think it's a different kind of anger this time. I think this is more of a rebellion that's happening, that's taking place, and we just need to direct that rebellion in the direction of innovation. We need to direct that rebellion in the direction of creating new systems to replace the old guard systems, an evolution rather than a revolution, as I mentioned so many times before. I think that's very important going forward. So we will see gold and silver continue to rise up. The gold-silver ratio shows a serious change of the guard as well. And we will see cryptos go up in the near future as well. And this is all in my opinion. Again, this isn't investment advice. And I think it's more about wealth insurance at this point. So I really hope that everyone does their own due diligence and works hard at understanding these topics and this subject matter in order to be able to better suit their own families and their friends and pass on this information as we fight an information war across the board here, as YouTube tries to muzzle us, as people have a harder and harder time explaining and expressing this information. People are waking up, so it's a losing battle, but we need you guys more than ever to enable our ability to reach people. So make sure to press like on this video, do all that kind of stuff. Find ways to talk to your family over Thanksgiving dinner and be that guy, because people will thank you down the line. For the time being, they'll call you crazy, they'll call you stupid, they'll not want to invite you to parties, all that kind of stuff. But what's better, being unpopular or being silent? I would much rather be unpopular. And you know what? It always works out in the end. It always prevails in the end, and us crazy people are seen as a lot more stable when everyone comes running to us going, oh, you were right. What do we do now? Well, here we go. Anyway, again, responsibility is the key to all freedom. Freedom and responsibility, individual freedom, play hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. So food, water, shelter, self-defense, you're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block. gold and silver, in my opinion, as wealth insurance, and cryptocurrencies as the another way to hedge your bets against this massive collapse of a crazy system enforced by legal tender laws by fraud onto the masses. Fiat wouldn't be as bad if it weren't for the fact that it's forced on people. If people had the ability to go, yeah, I'll buy the US dollar, which is crazy, but yeah, I'll buy the US dollar, fine. It's the fact that it's printed and we're extorted to keep it alive, and they extort us further if we try to use other assets in order to get around the dollar. It's just insane. It is one of the biggest scams ever perpetrated onto the masses, and it's failed every single time it's ever tried. Fiat currency every single time. And we could see the same thing happen in ancient Rome and ancient Greece and all these places. Diocletian created so much currency, deficit spending to keep up with the war, and then price controls and wage controls and all this stuff. And what happens? We see the collapse of an empire eventually, thanks to their arrogance and belief that they had an eternal power, an eternal realm that could not ever go wrong because they played God and they centralized everything to death. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here, OM, don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon, we can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, as we are so heavily demonetized and shadow banned to a crazy extent. We have lost about 80% of our reach since the beginning of this year as they rip away subscribers, etc. It has gotten out of control, and it's becoming more and more difficult to stay alive here on World Alternative Media, bringing you guys free content every day. You can also check our Bitcoin address in the description as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also check us out on all these other alternatives like Subscribestar, where we are doing subscriber only content for people at the $4.99 US a month tier and up. We really appreciate it. You could tip us on there and pledge anything, but from $4.99 and up, we are giving people subscriber only content that you won't find here on YouTube. And speaking of YouTube, there are so many alternatives for YouTube these days, including BitChute, which we are on at World Alternative Media, as well as, of course, the new flote.app, flote.app, where they are truly replacing all of these social medias, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Tumblr, Reddit, and of course, Twitch and Patreon, all in one place, and it is truly incredible what they are doing. We are moving over there in mass, as well as BitChute, BitTube, Steemit at Josh Sigurdson, all those other places, as well as PocketNet. We are on as well at World Alternative Media. There's so many options today, and we're trying to get into as many of them as possible because we need to back ourselves up. We are winning this information war, but we are getting to a point where they're cracking down more desperately than ever, and we got to do whatever we can to stay alive as it's getting more and more difficult all the time. We also have events coming up, including Anarchadelphia 2019, which will be in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in September. Check out thestateofanarchy.com and anarchadelphia.com. Linked below, use promo code WAM, W-A-M, and save 10% on your tickets to this amazing conference as Anarchy is going viral. Also, make sure to check out the Winnipeg Crypto Conference in October. Also, use promo code WAM, another great event with amazing speakers, and of course, Anarchapulco, the one and only, in February 2020, which you can also use promo code WAM for WAM and save 10%. There's so many things that you can do to help independent media, including just pressing like, sharing, clicking the notification button, doing whatever you can to help keep this free information alive that's alternative to the mainstream. Anyway, until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.